Welcome everyone to the Pathways to Careers in NASA Science and Engineering webinar. My name is Paige Graff and I'm going to be facilitating tonight's session, but I couldn't do this alone. We have 3 guest speakers, which will have each of them introduce themselves as they give their presentation: Valerie Tu, Charisse Kreitzer, and Naids. But I also want to mention that we wouldn't be able to run this webinar without our partners, Margaret Baggio and Selena Miller from the Texas Space Grant and the SEES, or STEM Enhancement and Earth Science High School Internship Program. If you're not familiar with SEES and you're a high school student, this is an opportunity. SEES enables high school students to work with NASA scientists during a summer internship program for 2 weeks, where they spend those 2 weeks at the University of Texas in Austin as part of the SEES program. And it is a fabulous opportunity, especially for high school students who are looking to sort of experience some NASA science. So we're thankful for Margaret and Selena for hosting this event for us. I also want to say that we are so happy to have all of you on the line with us today. We did have registrants from over 20 states and Canada. And so for those of you joining us live, we're glad to have you here. For those of you watching the archive, we're so glad that you're watching the archive to hear about our speakers. So with that, I am going to stop sharing my screen. And I'm going to turn things over to our first speaker, Valerie. Valerie, if you want to start sharing, we're looking forward to hearing about your career pathway.
Hi, everyone. As Paige has said, I'm Valerie Tu. And to start things off, I thought I'd give you this nice selfie of the Curiosity rover. Curiosity is located at this location called Mont Mercure, and that's in Gale Crater, Mars. So that should give you a little hint at the kind of work that I do. All right, and here's just a little bit of a roadmap to tell you about what I'm going to be talking about today. So obviously I'm going to give an introduction of myself and what I do, and then I'm going to get into my specific journey, how I landed my career, and what my career consists of, and how it has evolved over time. And then if you have questions, again, like Paige said, be sure to put those in Sligo, and of course there'll be a Q&A session afterwards. So also I'll point out that you have this nice panorama. This was taken again from on top of Mont Mercure. This is where Curiosity now has the camera pointing outward, so you can see this nice panorama of the view down Gale Crater. So a little bit about myself. Like you probably have already guessed, I work on Mars. So I'm a planetary geologist. Specifically, I'm a Mars research scientist. And so what that means is my job responsibilities include managing a lab for X-ray diffraction. And so what that means is that I basically use X-rays to help me determine what sorts of minerals are within soils, sediments, in both Earth rocks and even extraterrestrial samples like meteorites. I also do mission operations as a payload uplink and downlink lead for the this instrument that's on board Curiosity. Curiosity has about 10 different instruments on board, one of which is called the Chemistry and Mineralogy Instrument, ChemMin for short. So what it is an XRD instrument on the rover. And so what this does is it allows me to do mineralogical assessments of Martian sediments. So it's kind of cool. I get to do XRD both on Earth and on Mars. And so part of my responsibilities in mission operations is I create sequences that I send up and ping the rover with and tell the instructions to the rover on what to do with this instrument. And then again, I ping it when it's done its analysis and send the data back down so I can analyze it and discover what sorts of minerals are in it. In addition to that, I also check the instrument health and status to make sure that it's functioning the way it should be. Okay. So let's begin on my journey. And so I put together this slide just to be a little dramatic, right? A little drama here. So in the beginning, there was this dark force called life's challenges, and it posed hurdles to obtaining a career as a planetary geologist at NASA. But one very determined woman, AKA me, emerged and persisted. Okay, so enough with the drama, but I'm going to digress and tell you my journey starting from, say, high school. So I didn't always know I wanted to be a geologist. When I was young, there weren't a lot of opportunities and I didn't know a lot of geologists. It wasn't until I got into high school that I was introduced to earth science and I became very interested, and I knew this was going to be a path that I really wanted to pursue. Now, a little bit more about me personally is that I came from meager beginnings. My family didn't have a lot of money. Nobody had gone to college, and some of them haven't even made it through high school. And so I had to work very hard. Many students oftentimes have to work during their high school careers to help their families out. I did. So I was up at 4 o'clock in the morning, working up until it was time to start school. And then after school, I would be working at it again to help pay bills. And because of that, in all transparency, I almost failed out of high school. I was struggling. I would fall asleep in classes. I would have a hard time turning in homework, but I was very persistent and very determined to get through it. And I did. I was able to graduate high school. But if you don't have a decent GPA, well, you're not going to get scholarships, right? And my family couldn't afford to send me to college. So what I did then is I went and decided to go to community college. So I did that for a couple of years. I picked up my GPA, and then things like scholarships became available to me. So I really researched scholarships, grants, and any sort of resources I could to help me to get into college. And then once I got my foot in the door, I kept my GPA up, and I was always a stellar student, and I was able to basically fund my entire education off of scholarships and grants by myself. So don't ever think that there isn't a way or a path forward, even if you're not doing so great in school. So again, I was a non-traditional student in that I didn't go directly into a four-year accredited college. It wasn't until later in life that I entered. And when I did, I went to this university, the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. So I was an adult at this time. I had met my husband and we lived in Las Vegas. And it just so happens to have gorgeous geology. It's not all about casinos and gambling in Vegas. There's also phenomenal geology, like the picture that you're seeing here to the left called Valley Fire. And there's an image to the right. That's just a snapshot of part of the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. So here I majored in geology and geoscience and got both my bachelor's and master's here. While I was there as an undergraduate, I wanted to make sure that I was really exploring the entire breadth of geology. So I did research projects. I did a research project on economic geology, studying fluid inclusions in a silver ore deposit out of Mexico. I was looking at serpentinite weathering from the Klamath Mountains to understand implications for Mars CO2 sequestration. I also did a remote sensing project looking at the albedo rocks in the Mojave Desert. And then I was actually able to get a project, my thesis project, and my advisor was a planetary geologist. And so then I focused on geochemistry and kinetics, specifically with phosphate dissolution. Okay, so when I graduated, I was able to walk right into NASA, right? No, that doesn't often or always happen. So when I graduated, there weren't really many jobs, and those jobs are very scarce and very competitive. So, you know, at that time, I had had a baby, we had a family, I need to pay the bills. And it just so happened that this company, Marathon Oil, recruited from high school. So I was fortunate to be able to do not one, but 2 internships with them. Again, this was something that was way out of my comfort zone. I'm a planetary geologist. I didn't know much about oil and gas, but they were willing to give me the opportunity. And guess what? I did it anyways, even though I wasn't comfortable. And I think it really helped me with some of the skill sets that I developed bringing over to NASA. So a little bit about how I landed that full-time job there was, of course, with the internships. But when I was within those internships, I made sure that I learned how to be a team player. This is of the essence. I don't know any job that I've ever been to where it isn't crucial that you be a good team player. I was also willing to accept responsibilities that weren't within my wheelhouse. And I didn't get too comfortable with any roles or responsibilities, or even with my office, because I can't tell you how many times I've had to change one or all of those things. I also connected with a lot of people. You don't know this about me, but my coworkers do. I tend to be very shy and introverted. So this was a big hurdle for me, but I found it very necessary to connect with a lot of people. And so I pushed myself to do that. And lastly, this is kind of an odd bullet point, but I care. In all of my performance reviews and speaking with coworkers and with supervisors, I always hear how much I care. I'm passionate about my work. I care about the quality of my work. And I also care about the people that I work with. And that has really helped make me the glue of the team. So the bottom line that I want you to take away from this slide is that, internships are very important. It is your gateway to a full-time position. And if you are fortunate enough to get an internship, make sure you really capitalize on the entire internship and all the experiences and skill sets that you get with it. Okay, so then while I was busy working at Marathon, I was tapped on the shoulder, just happened chance, this once in a lifetime opportunity through my former advisor. She knew people over at NASA Johnson Space Center, and they said, hey, we really need somebody with these skill sets. Do you know anyone? And she said, you know what? I just so happen to know Valerie. And so they reached out to me. And it wasn't just handed to me. I had to go through the application process. I had to compete with other applicants. But some of the things that I heard that helped me in landing the job was being passionate. So, if there's something you really, really want, you've got to go after it. You've got to research it. You've got to put in the hard work. I was always very malleable. I was able to demonstrate that I could do different types of roles, different responsibilities. That seemed to help. I helped set myself aside by being unique. Like I said, you take on different roles, you take on different skill sets. This helps set you aside from other people. I made lots of connections. I would go to conferences and email individuals and introduce myself. Sometimes it was helpful to read a scientific paper on somebody that I was interested in working with or getting to know more, and then contacting them and saying, hey, I read your paper. I think this is great. I have some questions and I'd like to introduce myself. Again, getting uncomfortable. If you feel like you're getting really comfortable in something, it means you're either mastered it or very decent at it, and maybe it's time to try something different. And it's also the little things that I think count, being humble, being yourself, being genuine to you and your passions, I think has been very helpful. There's a couple images here just for your entertainment. Obviously, we've already pointed out curiosity and saying hello. But then there's me preparing a sample in my lab. And there's also this kind of funny looking instrument to the right of me with blue glass. This is called the Chemin 4 analog instrument. It's the replica of what is on the rover. So what I can do with this is I run samples through this, and I can compare it with the samples that are being ran on Mars to help me determine what sorts of mineralogy there is. And here's a pretty picture for you. I wanted to give you some examples of the types of projects that I've been able to work on. So I've been able to analyze samples from all over the world, and like I said, even from outer space, like meteorites. But I picked this one in particular because I just happen to think it's a beautiful picture. So there were samples from Antarctica, specifically this little pond that you see here called Don Juan Pond. It is the second saltiest body of water in the entire Earth. And there's some samples there that I had been preparing. But basically with this work, with this job, that I've been able to see samples from all over the world, samples from Iceland. I've even been able to do samples from Venus analogs, lunar analogs, just all over the world. Now, how my job has evolved over time. So like I said, I started off as a lab manager and doing mission ops, but it has evolved into me being able to write scientific papers, abstracts, grant proposals. I've presented at numerous scientific conferences. I've sat on lots of panel reviews, and I've done lots of outreach opportunities like this one today. And I've even been able to recruit from my alma mater, which is near and dear to my heart. And there's some images here. There's a fun outreach event that I did where the kids had built their own spaceship and everything. It was really cool. There's me giving a talk at Caltech. There's an astronaut to the right. I helped train on that instrument that he's holding called the XRF. And then up top is a picture of me giving a tour of my lab to some professors from, I believe, Alabama. So what I'm looking forward to in the future is working on other missions and other planets. As much as I love curiosity and I love Mars, and they'll always be dear to me, I want to branch out and see what other missions and other planets and what they hold. And with that, I know it says questions here, but feel free to put those in Sligo, like Paige had said before. And I'm going to stop sharing and let our next speaker, Charisse, go ahead and take the floor.
My name is Charisse Kreitzer. I am currently a lunar curation processor out at NASA's Johnson Space Center. I work for a small company called HX5, which is part of the Jacobs JETS contract, which is the contract that is in charge of the Astromaterials that NASA brings back to the Earth. Okay. All right, so the first thing I want to do is talk about what in the world does a lunar curation processor do? Well, in a sentence, I break moon rocks for a living. So I'm one of about, I believe, 6 people in the world who actually gets to put her hands on the Apollo moon rock collection. There's a little bit more than just breaking moon rocks. I'm responsible for preparing samples for the scientists who do their lunar research on these samples. I get them ready for that research, and I also have to make sure that the rest of the Apollo collection is preserved for any future lunar research that is going to be done on it. Okay, so how in the world do we do these things? How do we prepare these samples for these scientists, and how do we protect the collection? The first thing that we do to preserve the collection is we work in a clean room. So a clean room is a space that has a very low number of airborne particles like dust. What you're looking at right now is the vault where we keep the pristine samples of the Apollo moon rock collection. And this is a class 1000 clean room, which means 1000 or less particles of a size micron or greater per cubic meter. And just for comparison's sake, a human hair is about 70 microns across. Also, by comparison, an operating room in a hospital would be about a class 10,000. And just the ambient air around you contains about 35 million particles of a half micron of greater. So it's pretty clean in this area. So we also, in addition to working in a clean room, we have to keep ourselves rather clean. So we work in these funny suits that we do call bunny suits. Yes, that is the technical term. And we wear these suits to make sure that any particles that are shed by our bodies, like dead skin cells and hairs and things like that, are not released into the clean room. We also keep the samples in these cabinets that you can see here that seals them away from the regular air all around us. And these cabinets are filled with dry nitrogen. And that helps to protect the samples from being exposed to the Earth's atmosphere. We want to learn about the moon. We don't want to learn about what Houston weather does to the moon. So in addition to all these precautions that we take, we're only allowed to touch the samples with 3 materials: Teflon, stainless steel, and aluminum. That's it. Okay, so just now I want to go through what my career path was from when I was a kid all the way until now. So to begin with, I feel like I'm pretty lucky because I've known from the get-go that I wanted to work in the space industry. When I was 9 years old, I wanted to be an astronaut. I always loved space. I was a big Star Trek and Star Wars nerd. I read and studied anything that I could get my hands on that had to do with spaceflight or just the science of space. And so as I went along in my schooling, I grew up in San Antonio, and I was an Army brat. My dad was in the military. and I went to Judson High School, and I was in the honors program there. And so I took classes like calculus, like physics, also honors English, which you may be surprised to learn that I actually still use my honors English knowledge that I picked up in high school. I used it all the way through my college career, and I still use it now where I am in my current job. So even if you are interested in science, even if you are interested in engineering, and you think that you're not going to need those grammar skills and those literature analysis skills, I'm here to tell you that you will use them a lot, regardless of whatever path you take. So pay attention. I was very fortunate to get a 4-year scholarship to the University of Texas at Austin. I majored in aerospace engineering. And while I was there, I did a lot of things outside of my major. So while I was taking my classes, I was also part of the sailing club, and I learned how to ballroom dance. I had a lot of fun doing that. I met a lot of friends. I did a lot of extracurriculars. It was a great time. And I learned from there that it was really important to not only pay attention to my classes and pay attention to the technical things that I was learning, but also to have a well-rounded life, which meant having a lot of different interests and a lot of different experiences. The one thing I do really regret, though, is that I didn't pursue any internships, or I didn't pursue the co-op program. If I had to do it all over again, I would definitely do one of those. And Valerie talked about why that was so important. After I graduated from UT Austin, I came to Johnson Space Center. I was hired by a company called United Space Alliance, which at the time was NASA's largest contractor. So the way that NASA actually works is that not everybody who works at NASA works for NASA. So there, for example, where I work at Johnson Space Center, there's about 12,000 people, anywhere between 10 and 12,000 people who work at the center, but only about 3,000 of them are actual NASA employees, civil servants. They work directly for the government. The rest of us actually work for companies that are contracted by NASA to carry out the work at NASA. So that's what I did, is I went to work for one of these contractors called the United Space Alliance, and they were the ones who were actually flying and controlling the space shuttle and the space station. So I went to work for them as an International Space Station's instructor. I was teaching astronauts and flight controllers how to operate the mechanism that was used to attach the pressurized modules to the International Space Station, which was under construction. And I really lucked out, because when I got hired on right after I graduated, that summer, the International Space Station received its first permanent crew. So Expedition 1 was launched that summer. So it was a really exciting time to be working at NASA. And I did that job for about 7 years. And then I started thinking about what came next. And there were a few things that made me think about changing jobs, and perhaps in the end, changing careers. Number one, I had met the man that I was going to marry, and we were talking about starting a family. And I didn't feel that the job that I had as an ISS instructor was going to be very amenable to that, because while it was a very exciting, very enjoyable job, and I loved it, it was also very, the hours were all over the place. Sometimes you could be in the simulator at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning, or you were expected to be in at work at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. And it was not something that I really wanted to carry forward when I did start my family. So I started thinking about what I wanted to do. And I actually went back to my first love, which was planetary science, which is the study of the planets. And that was really what I had loved about space when I was a kid. So I decided to go back to school. I applied at the University of Houston for geology. And at the same time, I started a new job with the engineering team in payload safety. So it was my job to assess the payloads that were flying on the space shuttle and the space station to make sure that they complied with all of the safety requirements, because the last thing you want is a payload being shaken loose during launch or on orbit, because you could do some really terrible damage either to the vehicle or to the crew member. And that was one of the things that we really did not want to happen. So I was doing those two things. That I was working during the day and I was taking classes at night. And then a few years into that job, I made the transition back into the International Space Station. But this time I was on the science side of the house rather than on the engineering side of the house. So I went to work for the ISS Program Science Office, which is the office that is in charge of all of the science that was performed on the International Space Station. And from there, I continued to take my classes. And at this point, I was really researching the Curation group, which is also out at Johnson Space Center. And I saw that they had an opening for a lunar curation processor. So I decided to go ahead and apply. I didn't think that I had all the skills. I didn't think I was ready, but I wanted to push myself a little bit and really challenge that. And I was able to get into contact with the manager who was hiring for that. And what do you know? They actually hired me. So that was a really great surprise. So that's how I came to be a lunar curation processor, and I get to work with the lunar rocks. One of the things that I really want you to take away from this slide is that where you start isn't necessarily going to be where you end up. So chances are, after you graduate, you are not going to stay in that job, that first job that you get straight out of college. You are going to be learning things about yourself. You're going to be learning things about the workplace. You're going to be learning things about your career path. And you're going to start to put that knowledge to use, and you're going to start to use it to guide what direction you want to go from. So I started out intending to be in engineering, and now I'm not in engineering at all. I'm all the way over on the science side of the house. So, and that's okay. You're going to probably change careers a few times. You're definitely going to change jobs, and that's perfectly right. That's perfectly all right, and it's perfectly normal. So the last few things I just want to talk about are some of the fun things or the awesome things that I get to do in my job. One of my big moments was that I got to be the processor who opened the first lunar sample in 40 years. And by opening, I mean that it was sealed on the moon, and it was set aside deliberately to not be opened when they brought all the samples back from the moon during 1969 to 1972, because they knew that they were going to find new questions that they wanted to answer. Technology was going to advance, and new techniques and new analyses were going to be possible in the future that weren't possible when they first brought back the rocks. So they deliberately just set aside a portion of the collection to be opened in the future. And I got to open that very first sample when they decided to do that. So that was really exciting and a little nerve-wracking. So one of the other things that I got to do is, this is a picture of the Lunar Display that you can see here on the bottom shelf. That is a display that I made that is now sitting in the Oval Office in the White House. So I got a nice claim to fame there. How many people get to say that they have something that they made, that they put their hands on, that is now sitting in the President of the United States office? So way cool there. One of the fun things that I get to do is I get to meet famous people who want to tour the moon rocks. They want to see how we work in the lab. And I've met a lot of cool people this way. So you can see me here with Hugh Jackman. He's the tall guy to the left. He and his family came to tour to tour our lab. And then we also, because of where we are Johnson Space Center, we are surrounded by a lot of cool things, and we just get to go and walk over and get to see and experience these things, even if we aren't necessarily working on these projects. So here you can see us having a great job in the lunar rover that they keep stored at Building 9. This is one of the robotic projects that Building 9 is working on. And with that, I am going to go ahead and turn it over to Adam.
Awesome. Well, hello, everybody. Glad to be here this evening with you, and really just excited to share about my path, and looking forward to answering some more of your questions. So just a little bit about me first. So I am a project manager for geology tools. And so I'll tell you a little bit about what I get to do there. But my personal life, I like to play music. I have a beautiful wife named Elena. I love fitness and athletics, and I've got to participate in American Ninja Warrior for a few times. I'll tell you a little bit about that journey. And then I just love to scuba dive and do any kind of water sports as well. Also, I took up life coaching, and I got trained in that about a year and a half ago. And so I'm doing that kind of on the side and as part of my job at NASA too. So really fun. I love mentoring, coaching people to achieve their goals. And so that'll be a little theme of my presentation today. So just talking about my journey in high school. High school was really a consequential time for me because that's where I really found my interest. And I took a forensic science class, and I thought that is what I was going to do. It was just super interesting. I love solving problems. So I love science. But then I took an astronomy course, and I fell in love with space exploration. And so that happened. And then I also took part in the first robotics club that our school had. It was actually the first year that we had done it, but you may have heard of it, some of you out there, but you build a robot with your school, and you compete in a game against other schools. And so it was just a lot of fun. I got to work on a team. I got to do some software stuff. I got to do some design and get hands-on. And so both of those things happened at the same time. And it was actually my astronomy teacher who said, hey, maybe you should be an aerospace engineer. And here's a pamphlet for this school called Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University that you should go to. And I was like, what is that? I've never heard about that before. But that is kind of where that came from. And I'll share that story here next. But that is kind of what put me on the trajectory. And, you know, for me, I was one of those people like Charisse here, is that like I fell in love with space, and I knew that that's what I wanted to do. And that's not the case for everybody, as you find. But for me, it was, and I went after that goal head on. So then I did end up going to this place called Embry-Riddle. It's a small school down in Florida. You know, I did look at other places, but this was just really an attractive place. The university was beautiful. It was in Florida, away from my home, which, by the way, is in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So that's where I'm from originally. And they had a bunch of astronauts that have graduated from this school. It just had a lot of pluses. So that's where I went. I actually started with, my major was in aerospace engineering. I did that for the first 2 years, and then I actually changed to engineering physics for various reasons. And then I also did a minor in psychology. So when I got to college, I should say, even in high school, people were telling me about the importance of internships and co-ops. And you've heard the other speakers talk about that as well. And so I heard that message loud and clear. And my freshman year of college, you know, when it got to the summertime or close to the summertime, I started applying to every space-related internship that I could possibly find. And Unfortunately, I was declined from every single one of them. And eventually what I ended up doing was I applied to this pharmaceutical company that my dad happened to work for, and I got a job there. And, you know, it doesn't have anything to do with space, but I'm really grateful for that opportunity, because if it was, you know, between working there or working, you know, at somewhere else like that, or not doing anything over the summer, it was such an important time for me, because I learned how to work in a professional environment. I worked in the quality assurance department of this place called Shire Pharmaceuticals, and I learned a lot by doing that, and I'm really glad that I did. And then I eventually continued applying. So every summer I would apply. The second summer after my sophomore year, nothing from NASA. And then somebody recommended that I apply for an internship or co-op during a fall or a spring semester. Just statistically, a lot of people would rather take an internship in the summer when they're not going to school, as opposed to taking off a semester of school. But I didn't really care. Like it didn't matter to me about graduating college in 4 years. What mattered to me was getting my dream job at NASA, or in the space industry. So I ended up applying for an internship in the spring of my junior year of college, and I got an internship. So I'm sure that doesn't happen all the time for everybody, but it worked out for me. It was good advice. And then that led me down this path that got me this full-time job. I did add it up over toward the end of college about how many applications I submitted, and it was a little more than 30. So I applied to 30 jobs over those first 2.5 years of college before I even got an interview. And so that was very demoralizing, but you know, you really want something badly, you keep pushing at it, and it can work out for you. So I talked about Shire a little bit already. I don't really need to talk about that a lot more. It was really good. And so I encourage you, even if you're getting a job that's not in the field that you think you want to be in, whether it's space or whatever, there can be value in those opportunities. You can learn a lot of skills that translate between jobs. But as I mentioned, I was finally successful at getting an internship at NASA. So that was spring of 2010. So it's been a number of years, but I got to do a whole bunch of stuff. So I did that internship. I got a second internship, and then I joined what's called the NASA the Pathways Internship Program, which is another ways to say co-op. Basically, when you get admitted into that, you get to do you come back for multiple internships. So in all, I did 4 tours of duty at NASA in various different places around. And that's something that you should know too, is like there's just so much to do at NASA, in the space industry in general, right? There's not just everybody is an aerospace engineer. You know, you have mechanical engineers, you have computer science people, you have planetary scientists, you have business people, business majors, accounting, finance, management. Like there's just so many different ways to get involved and contribute to the space agency. So after getting so those internships and the Pathways internship program specifically did lead to a full-time job offer for me, but I really wanted to continue to learn, and so it was a few years after being full-time, I did pursue a master's degree. I did it remotely before doing things remotely was cool / forced on us. And so I got to do that while working full time. I took 1 class in the evening, and it took me 4 years to finish my master's degree. But I was working, and I'm really glad that I did that. So my master's degree was in aerospace engineering sciences, and I did a focus in bioastronautics, which is just humans in space. All right, let's talk about what I do now. So, dude, wow, there's just like so many awesome things happening at NASA right now. We got the SLS rocket, we got the Orion spacecraft, we got the Artemis program. We're launching people to the moon. We still have the space station, and I've been very fortunate to get to be involved in all of these in a little bit. But the major thing that I've got to contribute to is the Artemis program, and specifically spacewalking. So I've been the project manager for spacewalking geology tools for Artemis, and so I've got to work with these planetary scientists that you've heard from today, and their colleagues in trying to figure out like what tools do we need to get the samples, to bring them back so that Charisse can curate them and give them out to people. So it's been really, I mean, it's crazy. It's just crazy. I never thought that I would get to be involved in this, nonetheless have a leadership role in it. And it's just been a really awesome position to have. Just some pictures. So, getting to make spacewalking tools, I get opportunity to get into spacesuits, which is fun. I get to work out and learn about how to do operations. We've got to do some underwater testing where we simulate being in reduced gravity and exploring really cool geologically interesting places. I've also got to work on a freezer for the space station. So, I did engineering physics in school, but I basically learned like a lot of mechanical engineering as well and things like that. But at NASA, I'm a team leader basically. So I have a team of people that do a lot of the detailed engineering work, and I just oversee that. I manage the budget, I manage the schedule, and I help to make the decisions. So it's kind of an interesting flavor of engineering. You have to have very different skills, which I've had to learn over the years to manage a team. But one of those teams was this iceberg freezer that is on the space station and helps to bring back scientific samples and while keeping them cold. And then I've also got to do some projects for the Orion program, which are also really interesting and fun. One of which is pictured down below. It's a urine bag. So if Orion does have a toilet, but if the toilet breaks, the astronauts need to go pee somewhere. And so this has been a really interesting project, getting to work with a lot of astronauts and making sure that this bodily function that everybody does is handled appropriately while floating in space around the moon. Okay, real quick on my Ninja Warrior experience here, and then I'll hand it back over to Paige. So yeah, Ninja Warrior is just like, I've watched it for years, and I've always just been like, oh, I can do that. That'd be cool to do. And then one year I was just watching it, and I just decided that was the year that I wanted to try it out. And so I did it for fun. I went to Ninja Warrior gyms, which they are now all over the country if you want to go check one out. And I fell in love with it, and I just decided like maybe I'll apply for the TV show, and I did that, and I got picked. So it was just pretty wild, and that has led to me coming back 4 times now, which I'm very grateful for that opportunity to compete. I've never really done as well as I know that I'm capable of doing, but so it goes in life. You keep pushing toward your dreams, and sometimes things don't work out, so you just keep pushing harder. I don't think that's, I'm gonna press past the video. And we're just gonna end here. You can, if you wanna see my Ninja Warrior run, I think you can like Google or look it up on YouTube, like Adam Naids Space Ninja. I'm the Space Ninja, so you can check that out on your own. And then just concluding here with some advice. So, seriously, like, your dreams are achievable. You've heard that a couple of times tonight, that people wanted to do something and made it happen. And, it takes a lot of hard work. There's probably a little bit of luck involved. but you can do it, and with time and commitment, you can do it, and it's very much worth it. You know, if you have a passion, whether it's in space or wherever it may be, you can have a job that you don't dread going to, you know, that you go to, and it's fun and enjoyable. And so I wish that for everybody here. And then I would say enjoy the process of working toward a goal. That process can be hard, of course, but you get to learn a lot, and you get to change for the better while you go through that. Those are crucial times. And then there's some questions about this in the Slido, and you can add more, but do activities that are outside of your normal classes. You know, those are the things that help you stand out. You know, I mentioned the first robotics club. When I got my first NASA internship, I was talking to the person who selected me, and she said that it was the first robotics club that made me stand out and helped her to choose me to get this internship in the robotics group. So I have a direct connection and data to that being a good decision. So I'd encourage you to get involved. You know, don't force it. You know, find things that interest you and join those, whether it's as part of your school at high school or college, of the activities and groups that they have, or just kind of in your personal life if you find other things, because that's where you learn to work on a team, you learn to grow, and you learn those skills that are really important. All right. I think that's the end of my time here. And yeah, I appreciate your attention. I hope you learned some stuff, and looking forward to our Q&A session.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for each of our speakers, from Adam to Charisse to Valerie. Each of them, as you've noticed, have very unique stories. And so hopefully you were able to hear some consistent themes throughout each of their talks, in terms of persistence, in terms of working hard, and in terms of having fun. You know, I think from all three of these folks, you can hear how passionate they are about the work that they do. And like Adam was saying, you know, loving what you do and being able to go to work and enjoy it every day is something that those that are in those types of positions, you're quite lucky. So if you're not having fun, you're not doing something right, because it's all about being able to enjoy what you do. So thank you so much, Adam, Charisse, and Valerie. And we do have a couple of questions that did come in. And if there are additional questions, by all means, put them in the Q&A. We've had quite a few questions answered already, but I actually want to start with this question. And I'm going to ask each of our speakers, I don't know who wants to go first, but what do you enjoy most about your job, and what is most challenging about your job? So those two perspectives, because you can enjoy things, but they're, you know, like in anything we do, there's always some challenges. So if you could talk a little bit about that, each of you. Maybe does anyone want to raise their hand as a starter? Or should I start from my order? We'll start with Valerie. So Valerie, what do you enjoy most, and why? And what are some of your challenges?
Sure. So it's easy as far as what I enjoy. So I find myself very fortunate that every day I get to wake up to beautiful images of Mars. And not everybody gets to say that, but that's one of my favorite parts of this job, is being able to see all these beautiful images. The second thing that I really love is just the teams and the people that I work with. Sometimes just having great colleagues means such a difference for your job and for the environment that you're working in. Challenges, I would say that, like I said, I've always been kind of shy, so interacting with people has always been kind of a challenge with me, and having to give lots of talks was, at least initially, very difficult for me. But also the stress of wanting to make sure you don't do anything to damage a rover that's on Mars is pretty stressful. But those are, I think, maybe the biggest challenges I have. Thanks.
And that's very interesting to think about. And so thank you, Valerie, for sharing. How about, let's go to Charisse next. How about you? Things you love and challenges and how you deal with both.
Okay. So one of the things that I absolutely love about this job is that I get to do something that only 6 people in the world get to do. I get to play with moon rocks every day. And they're such a precious resource. And so to be trusted to handle these things and to make sure that they get to the scientists who need them and to take care of them for really the rest of the world. I am so honored and so happy to be able to do that. So I love also that this is a dream that I had when I was a kid, and I'm doing it. I'm really doing it. And so, you know, remembering that little 8-year-old, 9-year-old girl who wanted to spend a career in space, and here I am in my mid 40s, and I've been able to do that, and it never gets old. Every day is just, it's like I sit there and I think, wow, you know, I really get to do this. I really did achieve my dreams. And to know that it's not ending. There's new things coming down the pike all the time. There's new things that we get to learn about. And I get to be there to learn about them on the front line. As far as challenges, I'm similar to Valerie. I'm shy. I'm also an introvert. So that means that it's very draining for me to be around people. It's also quite a challenge to speak up and put myself out there, which I have to do a lot because of the job that I do and the high profile nature of the job. That can be really, really exhausting. So one of the things I do try to do is, like Adam said, is I try to have lots of hobbies outside of work. I make sure that I'm always filling myself up after these exhausting days, and I put boundaries in place around my career. It is what I do. It is not who I am. So, you know, I go into work at 8:00 in the morning, but I leave at 5. And I don't work all night. I don't work on weekends. And that's been a really important way to deal with a lot of the challenges that do pop up.
That work-life balance is so very important. As you can hear, you know, each of these individuals that we've heard from so far with the answer to this question, they love what they do. But that work-life balance is an important thing. And there are a lot of folks who can sometimes struggle with that balance. So thank you for sharing that, Charisse. So now let's go over to Adam. Adam, what do you love about your job, and what are some of the challenges and how do you deal with them?
Perfect. Yeah, so best parts of the job that I enjoy is having influence. Like I get to make decisions that actually like affect what something looks like or what's going to happen on these space missions. And obviously we have really, really big teams of people to make these things happen. So I just got a little part of it. But, you know, I had an impact. One of the projects I led was the sleeping bags for Orion. Right? Like literally the astronauts are going to sleep in this thing that I helped to design and was a part of the decision-making process for. So just things like that they make it so surreal and so worth it for me and fun. In terms of challenges, the biggest one is that what we do here is hard and complicated. And with that comes a lot of process and approvals. And so sometimes I can get worn down by just how long some things take. And to overcome that, you know, I just have to realize that this is really big, right? If the sleeping bag tears in half while an astronaut comes off the wall while an astronaut is sleeping in it, that's not going to be a good day. So, you kind of just I ground myself in why some of these challenges come up, and then just keep pressing forward and work within the system.
Awesome. Thank you, Adam, as well. And, it's interesting to think that each of the types of work that these folks are doing, they affect other people and the work that they're doing, whether they're researchers that are looking at the data coming down from Mars, or a researcher who wants to work with a moon rock, or someone like an astronaut who's going to be sleeping in a sleeping bag. All of those things, they make an impact on not just individuals working on those projects, but individuals that want to work with parts of those projects. So thank you all for sharing that. And now, Adam, I think we have a question in specific to you that one of our individuals put in, and it's, how did your minor in psychology help you out later in life? And also, did you pursue it because of interest or because you wanted a career in it? Can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, I pursued it because of interest initially. And yes, it was absolutely useful. An engineering degree, a science degree, like these things can be very challenging, like to understand and learn. But humans are the most challenging, I think, thing that exists. And so I found really early on that, yes, my engineering technical knowledge was important, but like understanding people and how to work with them is also a lot of work, and in my opinion doesn't get taught as much as it should. And so having that psychology minor did help me get a jump start on some of that. And then eventually, becoming a life coach was really me taking that interest from my psychology minor, and now finally fulfilling this role as a coach as well. So yeah.
Well, thank you. Well, now each of you spoke about, or at least two of the three of you that I remember mentioned how you're shy and how it's hard for you to sort of get out there and push yourself beyond your limits. I'd like to ask each of you, and I'll start with Valerie, to talk a little bit about how do you go about pushing yourself beyond your comfort zone? How do you overcome the shyness? How do you get yourself out there? And, what are some of the strategies that you use to sort of open yourself up so that you could be successful? So Valerie, we'll start with you.
Sure, yeah, that's a great question. And my strategy might seem a little extreme, but I would volunteer for things that I know I definitely didn't want to do, like give a talk or be the first speaker at a talk. And when I had to give presentations, I made sure that I practiced and prepped and was ready to address any questions that I could. But yeah, I was kind of crazy. I'd sign up for stuff knowing full well that this goes against every fiber of my being, but I would force myself to do it. And it became easier over time, and doing it over and over again, you eventually desensitize to it. So that's my advice.
Awesome. How about you, Charisse?
So like Valerie said, I practice. So I actually started doing this when I was in college. I would go to the grocery store and I'm checking out, and the cashier says, "Hi, how are you today?" And I would just look down. I wouldn't make contact. I would just, give them my money and be on my way. That's how bad it was. So what I did is I just started with baby steps. I said, okay, it's too much. I knew it was too much to expect myself to have a full conversation with a stranger, but I could at least make eye contact and smile. So that's what I did. And I said, okay, every time you go to the grocery store, that's all you have to do. Just make eye contact and smile. You don't have to answer or anything like that. Just do that. And once I got into that habit and I found it very easy to do that, then I took the next step. Okay, you can answer their question. If they're asking you how you're doing today, just say, I'm doing good, thank you. That's all you have to do. You don't have to ask the question back. It was just another small step. And when I got comfortable doing that, then I stepped up and started asking them small talk questions. I'm doing very well. How are you today? And so that's kind of how I've worked it through my lifetime. And then just the practice, you know, you're going to find that after you do that for decades, you're going to be able to it's not much of an issue anymore.
Awesome. And that's such a great point, because I don't know if there are any students out there that, you know, are tentative or shy about things, or, you know, afraid to sort of get out of that comfort zone. And, you know, baby steps can really be important. So thank you for sharing that bit of story. And especially because you can relate to going to a grocery store and someone talking to you, and Valerie, same thing, you know, and it's amazing because I've seen these two women here give many talks, and you would never know that they were shy. So those baby steps are great. Now, Adam, I don't remember you saying you were shy. Maybe I missed it, but can you speak to a little bit of at least overcoming any things that are out of your comfort zone?
Absolutely. I definitely trend more toward the extrovert side. That being said, though, I mean, every day there are things that I encounter outside of my comfort zone, and I think everybody does. They're just different types of things, whether they're communication or their activities. So it's really, I really liked what Charisse said, is just like, you know, small steps. And for me, you know, I still get nervous speaking in front of crowds or speaking up at meetings sometimes, depending on like the level of that. And, you know, I realize it, I recognize it just in my heart, you know, in my stomach. You just like, I get that sensation. And then for me, it's just like it's the deep breath in those moments to just kind of, you know, recenter myself and remember what I want to say, why I want to say it, I'm contributing something. And you know, it reminded me of a book that I read. This gentleman, he basically just went around and started asking just questions to people, and he got told no a lot. But he got more comfortable like asking questions. It kind of connects to what Charisse said. You know, he would go into like a place that sells donuts, and he asked for, can I get the donuts like shaped and colored like the Olympic rings? Just like something random like that. And most people would say no, but some people would say yes. And like, and through that, he's getting confidence in just like asking for things, speaking up, and then he's also learning what it feels like to just have people tell him no a lot too. So it's kind of connected there. So small steps, and know that you're not alone. There's a lot of people that struggle every single day on little things, and we're all in this together.
And that's really a great point. You know, you're not alone with, in most cases, any of the, you know, thoughts or worries or concerns or things that you might work through as an individual. You're likely not alone. And so that deep breath, the thinking about, okay, what am I going to do to get through this? And also realizing that no isn't necessarily a bad thing. If someone says no, you've got to rethink, okay, well, if that didn't work out, if they won't give me those donuts in the shape of Olympic rings, well, maybe if I reframe my question a little bit so that, you know, I can get a yes, you sort of start to learn to strategize those things. So great responses from all of you. And now we do have about 7 minutes or so left. And if there are any additional questions that you want to put into the Slido, by all means, please do. There's also a survey that's open if you'd like to provide some input on our session tonight. But I do want to ask one additional question, and it's related to that no sort of thing. We heard in many instances either I didn't get an internship, or I didn't do an internship, or I got like no's to 30 different jobs that I tried to apply for, and I didn't know how I was going to be able to like actually do what I wanted to do. So in terms of this whole idea of whether it's internships or what type of advice you would give to our students on the line to enable them to think about their future success. Is it pursue internships? Is it, you know, do outside activities? Is it some other thing? If you had one piece of advice to think about to share with folks, what would that be? And I'm not going to start with Valerie this time. I'm going to start with Adam.
All right. So I'm going to try to think of a different piece of advice than was on my advice slide. So let's see.
And you can reinforce what you said if that's okay, if that's truly what you want to share.
I think the message that I'd like to give is just to reiterate that, you know, your dreams are achievable, and it takes, and I would encourage you to take your future into your own hands and think about what you want to do, why you want to do it, how to get there. Don't just let life take you on a journey, because, you know, sometimes that works out when you're, you know, exploring out in nature or something. But I think with your career, you know, figure out what you want to do. Know that it could change and that that's okay. Your path can change, like you heard tonight. But just take ownership of that.
Great advice. Let's go to Charisse next. What would you have to say in terms of advice for folks?
I would say don't get so hung up on famous names and titles. And what I mean by that is I've worked at NASA for over 20 years now. I have worked with people who have degrees from MIT, from Purdue, from Rice, from Harvard, from some really fancy Ivy League schools. And I've also worked with people who went to no-name community colleges and local universities that you would have never heard of unless you happen to be from that town. And we're all working towards the same mission. In many cases, we were doing the same jobs. We were making very similar salaries. So my advice is there is a path for you. It may not be the path that is strewn about in the movies or on TV, or that somebody else tells you is the only way. There is a path, and community college is perfectly acceptable. And no-name colleges, as long as they're accredited, perfectly acceptable. NASA will take you. Okay, NASA wants you, and they will take you. So I guess that's my advice.
Awesome, great advice. Thank you, Charisse, for sharing that as well. And Valerie, we'll finish up with you.
Okay, so thanks. I think I'm testament to what Charisse just said, right? So I went through community college and went to UNLV, and here I am at NASA. So it most certainly can happen for you too. My advice that I'd give to you is the advice I tend to have to give myself on a regular basis, and that's get out of your own way. If you want something bad enough, if you're very passionate about it, go get it, because the thing is, nobody's going to hand it to you. And let's face it, not everybody has the same opportunities in life. And sometimes it's going to be challenging, and sometimes you're going to have to do a little more work than maybe somebody else does. But the number one person who's going to stand in your way of being to fulfill your dreams is you. So please get out of your own way and go get it if you want it. And with that, back to you, Paige.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And, you know, in our minute or so left, I really want to just take a moment to thank our three speakers, Valerie, Charisse, and Adam. Thank you so much for sharing your career pathways to NASA science and engineering. I especially also want to thank Selena and Margaret for hosting this webinar. And most of all, we want to thank all of you out there. We hope you've listened. We hope you've learned something. We hope we've given you some things that you can reflect on as you pursue your own future career paths to NASA science, engineering, or anything else that's going to have you enjoy your work career every day of your life thereafter. So with that, we are 15 minutes past the top of the hour, and our time has come to an end. So thank you again, everybody. Thanks, Adam, Charisse, Valerie. And until next time, we look forward to connecting with you all again in the future.